Jasmine here, and I just wanted to just honor celebrations for this weekend. Remember, he who the Son has set free is free indeed.
How do we wisely lead people into God's all-encompassing providence, especially those who will be tempted more than ever to draw out signs from all of life's circumstances?
I think the question that every lover of the all-pervasive providence of God should ask is this: how shall I live my life so as to be found in the slipstream of God's providence with the fullest knowledge of God, the greatest love of God, and bearing most fruit for the eternal good of other people for the glory of God? I think that's the question.
Yeah.
The way of life that Jesus and the apostles teach us is rooted in the Word of God. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth, John 17:17. Jesus and the apostles don't encourage us to look for personal coded messages in providence for how to live our lives. We don't have the knowledge or the wisdom required for this. Just when you think that 3 circumstances or 3 natural signs have lined up to point to a certain direction of behavior and have a certain meaning, God sees 1,000 factors that you don't see that put a completely different meaning on those 3 that you do see. In other words, presuming to interpret providence for the guidance of your life is presumptuous. You don't have enough knowledge or wisdom.
So to recap, we've heard about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
And God showed that but for his intervention, Jacob would have been killed by Laban and by Esau. And if not that he would have drifted away into Canaanite culture, as we saw happening at Shechem, until God intervened.
Judah, and remember his symbol is the lion because he was so strong.
Genesis 38 is not just a messed up story. It's also an unexpected cutaway from the main story. You see, it happens in the middle of the well-known story of Joseph being sold into slavery in Egypt. But then the story just forgets about Joseph and jump cuts to Judah, Joseph's older brother, and this story of his daughter-in-law, Tamar. So Tamar marries Judah's firstborn son, whose name was, that was actually his name, It turns out he was a jerk, described as evil, and God kills him. So with Tamar now a widow, it was customary for the brother-in-law to marry the widow of his brother, if he was able. So Judah's second son, Onan, marries Tamar. Turns out Onan was also very selfish, and God kills him too. So Judah only has one more son left, Shelah. But Judah has now become very superstitious. And he doesn't want his son to marry Tamar, so he just leaves her a widow. All the while promising that one day, when his son grows older, she will be wed to him. But the years go by, and Tamar sees that this is not going to happen. You see, being a widow in the ancient world was a bad category to be in. There was no healthcare, and with no family to look after you, it could be a death sentence. Now, Tamar knew that, so she ended up taking matters into her own hands. She disguised herself as a prostitute and went to the town where Judah was working. Now, Judah's wife had passed away, and it had been a few months, so you can imagine he was open to paying for a prostitute. When he saw the prostitute, he didn't recognize Tamar, but he wanted to sleep with her, and he offered a baby goat as payment. The disguised Tamar took some personal items from him as a deposit until he was able to pay her: a seal, cord, and staff. A few months later, Tamar is home and visibly pregnant. When Judah finds out, he is furious that Tamar has become pregnant outside of wedlock, and he calls her a harlot. He even sentences her to be burned alive. But in a turn of legal brilliance, as she is brought out for punishment, she exclaims that she can identify the man whose child she bears. And she produces the personally identifying items that Judah had given the disguised prostitute. Judah realizes that he has wronged Tamar in not providing for her a husband, and he exclaims that she is more righteous than he is. Finally, Tamar gives birth to twins, and that is the last we hear of her.
Judah, his twins Perez and Zerah.
Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. May the Lord bless the reading of his holy word.
His twins Perez and Zerah, and then Hezron. And at this point, we learned about how the Hebrews ended up in Egypt when Judah's brother Joseph saved them from famine. Judah probably died while they were there. Hezron had Ram, and Hezrah probably also died. And Ram fathered Amminadab, who fathered Nashon and Elisheba.
The children we meet are Nashon and his daughter Elisheba. Before the Israelites reached the promised land, so Moses is still in charge, they're wandering through the desert, Nashon was called the leader of the people of Judah. And when Moses puts the finishing touches on the tabernacle, their mobile center of worship, Numbers 7, 10 through 12 states, when the altar was anointed, the leaders brought their offerings for its dedication and presented them before the altar. The one who brought his offering on the first day was Nashon, son of Amminadab of the tribe of Judah. Nashon was a godly leader, and Elisheba must have been a godly woman.
So who is Elisheba? She was super important because the Bible tells us that Aaron married the daughter of Amminadab. Her name was Elisheba. So we know that she was alive at the time of the Exodus, which means, counting back, we can see that the generations before her were living through the slavery of the Hebrew people in Egypt, which is probably why the Bible doesn't tell us much about what was happening to these specific people, because they were all doing the same thing all the time, every day. They were slaves of Pharaoh. And we can trust this because the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses himself. And since he was Aaron's brother, he could obviously tell us who his brother married. The other interesting thing about Elisheba and Aaron getting married is that the Bible tells us about their 4 sons. And they would become very important because Aaron became the beginning of the Israelite line of high priests once they left Egypt. They were the ones who carried out the sacrifice on the Day of Atonement each year.
Jesus and the apostles don't encourage us to look for personal coded messages in providence for how to live our lives. We don't have the knowledge or the wisdom required for this. Just when you think that 3 circumstances or 3 natural signs have lined up to point to a certain direction of behavior and have a certain meaning, God sees 1,000 factors that you don't see that put a completely different meaning on those 3 that you do see.
And that's all I've got for us today. Can't wait to see where it takes us next time. Bye, guys, and happy holidays.